That was the second year of Vortex running their field project. They scored big on some tornadoes up by Friona and Dimmitt. That was June 2nd of '95. I chased that day, but it was one of those days where I just jumped on the first storm that developed on the boundary without really looking at much other data. I just looked at the radar data and went. And the first storm of the day wasn't the best storm to be on. It was the storms that developed further off to the northwest that were the better storms. June 5th seemed to be a pretty easy forecast. There was a triple point, again, just northeast of Lubbock. A storm developed on the triple point, moved off the triple point, produced a huge tornado. I got the forecast right that day, but I made some bad road decisions, put me behind the storm, and I could never catch up with it or get into a position to view the tornado. So I had two big failures right close together. June 6th and 7th were days of reflection, chasing, reflecting on why I'm chasing. If I can't see these tornadoes close to home, then what the heck, right? So I was doubting myself, and even on June 8th, I was supposed to work, and I had intended on working until I actually looked at the setup. And I saw how unstable the atmosphere was east of the dry line. I mean, when you're talking about 20-knot southeast winds and mid 70 dew points out this far west and north in early June, you probably should chase. And so I figured out a way to chase.
Gene had a couple of days of off to go chasing, and of course, I saw this as being a nice classic day, but we thought that maybe June 7th was going to be a nice event near dusk up in Goodland area.
I saw some beautiful LP storms, got some great photography of twisted LP updrafts, skinny, twisted things that you're pretty sure are never going to produce tornadoes. But beautiful lightning, beautiful high plains LP, and we enjoyed that. I spent the night in Goodland. I was going to wake up to an easy day the next day because the models were showing that southwest Kansas was the place to be.
I was chasing with Jim Leonard and also Rich Thompson.
We had chased the upslope late evening supercells. Didn't see any tornadoes on the 7th, but we spent the night in Goodland.
Back then, the forecast model choice was the NGM, as we call it, the no good model, nested grunge model, however you want to call it. And one of the flaws with the NGM model was it was bad with fronts. The NGM the day before said that front would hang up like around Goodland or kind of west central Kansas, and we woke up in Goodland that morning to cold air, stratus, and drizzle, and the front was like way down in the Texas Panhandle. And we're still trying to recover. We're sleeping in because we're thinking it's gonna be closer, and we're not feeling too good.
So we wake up in the morning and we're in the cold air post frontal, and it's like, yeah, I mean, it was in the upper 40s, I think, and socked in with stratus. So we said, okay, we're not chasing here.
We went to the Weather Service office at Goodland, and they were a newly spun up weather forecast office with their own WSR 80D coming online around that time. And being Weather Service employees, we were able to go in there and look at the weather, and no problem. And suddenly I thought, oh God, the front's way down in Texas. We're way behind this. And we started looking at the data. I remember distinctly, this is a big thing in my brain. The observation at Childress, Texas around noontime, we're at the office, was like 92 over 75 with a southeast wind at 20 knots and blowing dust. And the NGM had this giant moisture convergence bullseye in the eastern Texas Panhandle by 0Z. As soon as we saw that, we dropped everything. We couldn't get out of there fast enough. And unfortunately, you can drive south out of Goodland on a state highway there's just really nobody is ever on it, and you can make really good time. So I'm not saying we were speeding, but we were speeding.
And then we woke up the morning of June 8th and saw that we were just absolutely blasted with cold air. Howling north wind. That is a horrible feeling when that happens. So we decided, okay, I think I woke Gene up.
And I just remember waking up early to some pounding on my hotel room door. And it was, you awake? And I peer out the window, pull the curtain aside, and it's Tim knocking on the door. I look up at the sky, and there's this racing strato Q, It's racing south.
And without breakfast or anything, we just barreled south, and we're going to have a big lunch in Perryton. And that's what we did.
We drove and we drove and drove south and reached the Oklahoma Panhandle. We still weren't out of it. We drove a little bit more right at the Texas state line, where just north of Perryton, Texas, we break out. And we break out into a classic tornado sky.
When I left the office, of course, I was a little uneasy about it, doubting myself once again, but it wasn't long. It wasn't long, maybe an hour or so after I left, that I started to see towers develop in the area where I thought things would happen. And I got up there. The storms developed northeast of Floydada, Texas. Really in Palo Duro Canyon is where it developed. When I got to it, there were three towers, and it almost looked like a multi-cell storm. But it wasn't long. I hadn't been there very long until the middle cell dominated and the other two evaporated. Soon after that, a rotating wall cloud developed, and I knew at that point things were probably going to go pretty well. I was confident. But I was also listening to radio reports of the Pampa tornado. You know, they were on live broadcasting that at the local radio station. I was listening to it, and I'm going, really? I said, here we are, another 60 miles up the road. I could have left at any time to go up there.
And then we heard on the radio a vortex that was operating in the area. And that sort of caused us to lose some time, you know, because we were kind of thinking, well, they know something better than us, right? And if they're operating in this area, I didn't like it too much because of the surge of the cold air. I thought maybe further south in the Texas Panhandle, we should just kind of drop away. So it's sort of an interesting decision to make when you have, vortexes in the area, they're eyeing, a storm. Would you give up on that storm and go elsewhere? I mean, come on. All the experts, they have all the equipment, they have all the gurus are there, and it's like, are you going to go ahead and leave that storm for a possible scenario further south? So we held our ground for a while up north.
We just knew that it wasn't going to be the area, the storm of the day, just to stick around on this boundary in the northern Texas Panhandle. So we made the cautious decision to drive further south, thicker into the warm air.
We were actually in communication with Bruce Haney. And Bruce Haney was saying, I'm in Clarendon, we got this big tornado on the ground, and it's moving north, and it's like, y'all need to get yourself south if you want a picturesque tornado. I mean, there's tornadoes and then there's tornadoes, and it's like, let's get a picturesque tornado. So we said, okay, so we left the vortex, folks, and we barreled south, and that's what we intercepted it.
When I saw the first tornado, I was northeast of Headley, and it was off in the haze. You couldn't see it just real well, but it was a fat cone, it was large, just probably 8 or 10 miles away, and you could see it off in the haze, but it had a very long horizontal tube sticking out of it, off to the northeast.
Time 6:01.
What happened was the tornado continued to move off to the north, or perhaps northeast, and it got cloaked in dirt. You just got to where you couldn't see it anymore, and so I decided to move on north. And as I was moving north, a new wall cloud was developing off to its northeast. So I'm thinking, here we go. It's the typical cyclic supercell here. The second tornado was a multi-vortex tornado, and then it developed into pretty much a wedge and moved off to the northwest.
Get a tornado tornado west, tornado northwest. Second tornado. We're on a cyclic supercell here. Tornado number 2 is right there. Tornado number 1 is back over in this area. It's roping out. Here's the new one. Power line flash. Tornado number 1. Tornado number 2.
Tornadoes 1 and 2 were the long track, long-lived, large tornadoes.
Right here.
Tornado number 3 was really almost,
Number 3, it looks like.
even though another tornado wasn't occurring at the time, I'd almost looking back on it now, characterize that as a satellite tornado of what was developing. It kind of evolved into a funnel aloft and was sucked into the developing mesocyclone where the McLean tornado developed. So it rotated into the new mesocyclone. Or perhaps it was all the same, hard to say.
Tornado number 4, if not in McLean, just to the north.
That particular tornado developed as a multiple vortex tornado. It crossed the road in front of me just north of McLean.
I'm too close here. Man, look at that motion. Power pole's going down. I'm too close. I'm turning around.
Yes, just north of McLean there when I had to back up. The tornado was enlarging. Some people say, they say, you should have stayed there. And, looking back on it, maybe I should have. But that was the first time I had approached something so large in my chasing career up to that point. And then I had to backtrack and outflank it. And I was able to do so. The road network cooperated. And when I approached it again, the tornado was huge. It was almost like a mesocyclone to the ground. Then I watched it cross the road in front of me as a large cone tornado. I was pretty close to it at that point. And then not long after that, I drove up on the point where the asphalt had been scoured.
Here's a place where concrete has been scoured. See it right there? Wow. Concrete has been scoured. Time is 7:04. Tornado's off to my northeast now.
I had to drive pretty slow, and even still at that point, power lines hanging low over the road raked the antennas off my vehicle, so I had to stop and collect those antennas. I got out of that particular tornado path, continued on to Kellerville, and then turned east. And then it wasn't very far east of there where I ran into the path again, and the large tension power lines and poles were across the road, and there was a point where I just couldn't go any further, not without risk getting stuck, in some farmer's field or something, and I don't like to trespass anyways.
We saw some of the storm, and I remember Vortex, the field project stuff was out then, so this is sort of the interesting part about running across them, because at that point, you didn't run across large numbers of people, but this big armada shows up, and that storm had trouble with cold outflow, but one of the locals came up with a cooler and had solid 4-inch spherical hailstones that he had just picked up, and he was excited to show us these. And I think we just decided there, it's like, okay, we weren't really thinking core punch today, but this probably says no. I mean, because again, these weren't just, it's 4 inches in one dimension, they were almost spherical, not really spiky. These were ice bombs, and it made an impression. And it was like, well, this storm's no good. We need to get to one of the southern ones. And Bobby had enough communication stuff where we were able to monitor a little bit of the vortex radio traffic.
So we dropped on southwest bound after the next one. And at this point, we're kind of tag teaming along with with the vortex crew at this point. And they're giving us these blow-by-blow accounts of what's happening from a storm coming out of the Texas Panhandle that had produced a whole series of tornadoes and is making a beeline towards Wheeler County in the Texas Panhandle. It already produced a series of impressive tornadoes, according to what Eric Rasmussen was saying on the vortex frequency.
Well, at first, the canyons were kind of wreaking havoc with visibility-wise, and of course we're approaching a storm from the north. So we have to be careful of that forward flank and the heavy rain and big hail. And we managed to avoid that and then work our way southwestward.
And we see it We follow, coming out of the core, light to moderate rain, ahead of any hail or anything. We find the beaver's tail to the storm, one main beaver's tail feeding southwest. All this strato Q racing along the beaver's tail, pointing right where the action area is. And this stuff is like a conveyor belt of helicity feeding right into murky darkness to the southwest.
And then all of a sudden, we come up on this rise, and there's just a massive tornado, and it's moving right for us. I mean, it was typically stationary, but just getting bigger and bigger and bigger, so it's on its way for you. And we decided to hold our ground and just to see, what are the odds of a tornado actually running over you? It's just like.
And we're watching it approach from out of the murk towards us. And it's this giant, it's scary. We're getting these lightning bolts raining down on us here and there. Wind is howling out of the northeast and northeast, feeding southwest right in, just pointing at the action area. And we're listening to Vortex saying it should cross at farm to market, such and such and such and such and such. And he's very accurate at his position because we were right there at that crossroads that he called out. And it's marching right up towards us. And Tim says, let's go up that road there, up on that hill. And it's this muddy road, that little 2-lane wheel rut road that goes up to this hilltop. Had we done that, we wouldn't have never made it back. And I said, no, Tim, let's not do that. Let's stay right here and watch it. And it's approaching at a pretty good clip. And then we finally decide to, all right, let's start booking it east a little bit.
Well, we had to actually flee out of that. The chasers become the chasees, because now this darn thing, and perspective-wise, as you start driving away from the tornado, it seems like the tornado is racing to catch you. This an interesting perspective problem here, and it's like, oh no, it's getting closer. We're trying to get away from it, and it's getting closer and closer and closer. And the faster we go, the faster it goes. And it's like, what does it know us? It knows what we're doing? What's going on? So it came down the Cap Rock and into a valley, and it was just a big old churning tornado. And so I was leaning out the window, videotaping back, while Gene was hightailing it east. And then we decided we were a safe distance and watched it, and it went like 29 miles. It was a long track tornado and hit a feedlot.
We had a route that was going to be very aggressive, at least with no radar, it would have been very aggressive. Coming in from the northeast, we got a little nervous because at this point we know it's tornadic and we know it's a big Cape day, and it's like we decided, we're going to give it a little wider berth, and actually looped around the east and south side and then came back up to the Kellerville tornado in progress.
And then suddenly the tornado came into view, and it turned out it was rated EF5 later on. Granted, it didn't hit much. It was actually the Vortex crew that rated as F5 later on. I think at the time it didn't hit much, and I think the Amarillo office was going to call it an EF4, but after further review, the Vortex crew and their official research documentation took out a farmhouse. They rated it as a 5. And the entertaining thing about this damage indicator was that supposedly that same farmhouse had been hit by a violent tornado like in the 70s. That came out of the research, and I thought, you're living in Tornado Alley, and your house is hit by a violent tornado twice within a couple of decades.
It looked a little bit like the Red Rock tornado at that point. This big cone thing with a wide debris fan, and it was kind of front lit, sort of a lighter gray on a darker background. And then we just looped around and eventually found ourselves east of the mesocyclone before the Allison tornado.
So I'm sitting there taking time-lapse video of it from a distance, and it wasn't as big as the Beloit updraft from June 15th of 1992, but it was up there. It was another physically large, impressive updraft. And at this point, we see this violent motion, and at the point we're predicting, okay, this is going to produce a wedge really soon.
And the wind's probably gusting 50 to 60 out of the east, and we've got like pea-sized hailstones falling. There's no rain, just sporadic small hailstones, and then occasional really close lightning strikes, and this just huge wall cloud, kind of murky thing to our west by a couple of miles. And it's like as soon as we could tell there was a tornado, it was a big tornado. It's like, hey, I think that's about a 1/4 mile wide tornado. I mean, by the time we could fully make it out visually, so then we just cut north, and it was moving faster than we thought.
So as we're driving, we get pretty close to it, and at this point, Rich is kind of freaking out that we're getting too close. We could get hit by satellite, Bob. We could get hit by satellite. I'm the one driving, and Jim, Leonard's, let's get a little closer. Let's get a little closer.
Yeah, Bobby, that's closer than you think it is. It's a lot closer than you think it is. Turn south, just until we got to figure out where we are. Okay. Yeah, the debris.
Go for it. Oh, wait a minute.
Go south, Bobby. South.
Go south.
Or stop at least so
Hurry up, turn around.
Everybody's talking at the same time, talking over each other. It's like, do we do this? Do we go south? Do we go north? Do we stop? Do we turn around? We were throwing out essentially every option that you could think of got thrown out in about a minute.
And I'm kind of leaning towards Jim. Let's get a little closer. Let's get a little closer. So, I mean, we step out, and of course,
The strong circulation is pretty strong.
I'm sure we were less than a mile, half a mile away from this 1.6 mile wide wedge, and you can hear all the roar. And
There was enough concern, I think, that we kind of just decided we're not going any closer. This is enough. And this is a big, dangerous tornado. We've already been fooled by it how quickly it formed and got closer to us. So it's like, now that it looks like it's kind of stopped, we're just gonna stay here. It's not gonna hit us if we just stay right here. So, and we were probably good. I mean, we were only about a half a mile away from the edge of the tornado. And again, for a tornado that big and murky conditions like that, it was like, that's close enough.
This is amazing. Wow, very nice.
You want to use my camera? It's shooting right now. You shoot it.
I'm shooting.
I can't. It's raining.
You can
turn and go north.
Yeah, you can turn around now.
Okay, we're turning and going north. Hold on.
Back up and then go that way.
And we can't see it. And we're sitting there thinking, what do we do next there? We don't have radar data or anything. And then here comes the Vortex Armada. And they pass by by one, the cars with their rigs, instrument rigs on the probe rigs on the roof racks. And Tim says, well, they know what they're doing. We're just going to follow right on behind them. And we start driving north and then east on the farm to market. And it starts getting darker and darker and darker. Then it's like 7 p.m. dark, and it's like 8 p.m. dark. It's so dark. It's the darkest during the day that I have ever seen, that I ever remember.
We got into the back end of the hook, not much in the way of hail there, and we got through it into the bear's cage, and then there's this just gigantic wedge right in front of us.
And there it is, crossing the road. Just this huge, massive wedge tornado that Tim and I can't get a camera angle on because the edge of the tornado is there and the edge of the tornado is over there. It's all tornado, and all we see is north to south motion in this wall of water vapor and, debris occasionally flying by.
And then a satellite tornado comes down and right on the road in front of us, and then gets ingested horizontally into this massive wedge. And Gene is just going, Gene is a very low-key guy. He's not going to get too excited about it. He was going crazy. He was going, wow, look at that. It was amazing to see this tornado, a satellite tornado, actually being ingested into this wedge. It came right down. Meanwhile, all this travel, we were low on fuel. So we go into Oklahoma, and because the power was out in the Panhandle, Texas Panhandle. So we went into Oklahoma, and I forget the town, a little podunk town, and there's a gas station on the corner. So Gene drives up, we're almost on E. Gene drives up, gets out, gets the pump going, and the power goes out there. It's like, just as we were trying to fuel the vehicle. So now we're nearly on E. What do? Do you still chase? Of course you do. So we went ahead, even on vapor, and chased up into when it crossed into Oklahoma, but by that time it was getting really dark, and we decided, because of the fuel situation, and we're not going to get anything picturesque now, we might as well just limp back, hopefully make it back to a fuel station and fill it up. So.
Then at that point, we just recovered east across the Oklahoma state line, and we got some gasoline at a gas station in Radon, and we were trying to fill up as fast as we could because we knew there were a whole bunch of other chasers that were low on gasoline behind us. The Vortex crew, we didn't want to get in the way of research, so gas it up, and I didn't run my car to the machine. I just threw him like $30 and got out of there as fast as I could. That was the grand finale crescendo of the Vortex experiment. As it turns out, a lot of the research vehicles actually ran out of gas.
Essentially, it was one of these where you saw everybody kind of trip and stumble over the finish line, is what it looked like, at the end of the marathon, and they just collapse and just kind of roll across the finish line, and that's it. Because the storm was still tornadic. It's just, they had this spectacular field case, and then essentially the whole armada just collapses. It was just, they were holding it together with tape and baling wire. The funding's low, and then when the power's out because of the tornadic storm, it's just like vehicles are just running out of gas. And fortunately, we had gassed up plenty, so we were fine. We just sort of heard of their problems, and honestly, we were excited about the tornadoes, and it was more like, well, I'm glad it's not us. I'm sure I'll pay for that sometime.
Word of damage on 152 near the speedbox west of Wheeler. Okay, copy. Take notes of that. Maybe we'll wait for damage survey in the morning. Thanks. 2 Cam 1.